Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this Textile Talk podcast. I'm Gail Cowley, and I'll be your host today. Joining me is author and artist Alison Whateley. Just to give you a little bit of background on her before we start our chat, Alison is a self-taught artist who works primarily with textiles, often incorporating mixed media elements into her work to enhance her compositions. She began her journey into textile art in her mid-40s, and since then her work has continually evolved as she experiments with new techniques and ideas. Her work is a celebration of the natural world, captured through this tactile and versatile medium. Drawing inspiration from the ever-changing seascapes and landscapes around her, Alison seeks to capture the beauty and tranquility of nature in each piece she creates. She skillfully combines new and reclaimed fabrics, using meticulous layering and stitching to create two distinct styles. One that's richly textured and abstract, and the other that embodies a representational, painterly quality. Her work has been featured in notable exhibitions, including the ING Discerning Eye exhibition and the Royal Society of Marine Artists exhibition. She also took part in Series 9 of Sky Art's Landscape Artist of the Year. She's a member of the Society for Embroidered Work, the Visual Artists Association, and the Devon Artists Network. She has now written her first book entitled Textile Seascapes, which is published by Crowwood Press. It takes readers through the essential skills and techniques needed to create stunning textile landscapes. This comprehensive resource equips both beginners and seasoned artists with the knowledge to create beautiful textile pieces. So, Alison, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. It's great to be able to chat with you and also to be able to hear more about this lovely new book that you have out called Textile Seascapes.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's a pleasure. I wonder if you could possibly start by telling us more about yourself, your background, and how you came to stitched art.
Yes, of course. So basically, I've always had a love of fabrics and stitch and love a good rummage round a fabric store. And I've always had a love of art from a child. I've always had pencils and paints to experiment with and love to draw and, as well as stitch, really. So for me, it's a way of being able to bring those two things together into something that is a bit of both. So it's not what I was trained to do. I am self-taught. I came to it sort of in my mid-40s when I had a period of illness, so I was off work for some time. And during that time, I decided to get the sewing machine out again. And things have sort of developed from there, really. I never set out in a way to be an artist, but as things gradually evolved, I started off making simple things once I'd learnt this technique of free motion machine embroidery. So I would be making simple designs on cushions and things like that. But to be honest, I get really bored really quickly with doing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah.
So I started to experiment with making a few pictures and very soon recognized that this was the way I wanted to go. And it's really just developed from there.
Right. So pharmacy, that's quite a deviation, isn't it, into textile art?
Very much so. Yes, you can't be too creative with medicines, really.
No, I would imagine. Do you think any part of your pharmaceutical background actually helps with textile art?
um, Probably not really. I think, for me, always trying to find time outside of work and fitting around a family to have some sort of creative time was something that I always tried to do. sometimes more successfully than others, but I'm sure you can appreciate what it's like. So in a way, it was my sort of escapism from, the pressures of a working life.
And I was really interested to know that you only made that change in your 40s. I think sometimes, certainly some of our students feel that you'll hear them say, "Oh, I'm too old to change career now. I'm too old to go in another direction." And that's not true, is it?
No, absolutely. You are never too old. And I know of people that are making, a successful career of doing something like this, or any form of art, who are much older than I am. So it's never too late. I think if it's in you, it will always be there. And sometimes it's just about the being in the right place at the right time, the right opportunity coming along, and just circumstances in life, which means you can maybe take that opportunity.
Yes, yeah. And do you think that maybe it's actually added something extra, that coming to it as someone who is more mature than perhaps someone just leaving university, do you think that's actually been an advantage in some ways?
Yeah, I think it can be in some ways. I think, you've got more life experience in a way. I guess for me, I find that being a bit more mature when I'm out at shows or doing workshops, running workshops, I feel more confident talking to people, in a way being the one that they are focusing on. The center of attention sounds a bit funny, but I'm
No, I
much
know.
more used to that. And I think if I'd have done this much earlier, I don't know that I would have had the confidence to stand up in a room full of people and do a talk on what I do and do demonstrations. So I think in that respect, it's helped me. Yes.
Yes, I'm thinking back to the person I was when I left school. I'm not sure that I would have necessarily wanted to have been, as you say, the focus of attention at the front of a class or
Mm.
at a book signing or something like that. I think as you get older, you do develop a little bit more in the way of confidence, don't you?
Absolutely. And I think you worry a bit less about what people think as well. I think when you're younger and you're just starting out, it's very easy to be very wrapped up in, have I done this right? Am I perfect? Does it sound good? And, the reality is we're all human. We all make mistakes. We all have off days. So nobody is perfect all the time. And I think as you go through life and you've been through your ups and downs, I think you start to realize that actually you don't have to be perfect.
No, absolutely. You can only ever do as y my mum always told me actually when I was going out of the house as a teenager and I was fussing about my appearance, "Look at yourself once, make sure that, you're as tidy as you can be, and then get out and forget about it.
Mm.
Forget about yourself and concentrate on other people." And I think she was right really, wasn't she?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's just so important to just get out there and think, okay, I'm going to give this a go. And I'm more inclined to do that now than I ever would have been, say, in my 20s.
Mm.
And it's how I've got to where I am now, I guess, is because I've thought, well, I'll just give it a go. And if it doesn't work, well, you mark it down to experience and you move on from it. Whereas I think when you're younger, you're so worried in case it doesn't work that it can sometimes, certainly for my younger self, it would have put me off even trying.
Yes, I think sometimes you can almost sabotage yourself, can't you? You're so worried about it not working, and that makes it not work.
Yeah, absolutely. And the
Mm.
reality is that, if you're an artist, the reality is that not everybody is going to like what you do. I go to a lot of art shows and exhibitions and things, and just like everybody else, I look at things and think, oh, I really like that, or actually, that does nothing for me. It doesn't mean to say if I don't like it that I don't appreciate the skill and the technique and the time that's gone into it. It's just not my taste. And it's exactly the same, and the sooner as an artist you recognize that what you're putting out there, yes, there will be people that love it, but there will also be people who say, well, yeah, I appreciate the skill, but it's not for me. And that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, it does feel very much as though you're putting your inner self on show, doesn't it? It's that's your creativity, your art that's being put out there, and it makes you feel, I don't know, when other people don't like it, perhaps very exposed in a way that you wouldn't necessarily feel if you couldn't, for example, do a particular stitch or a particular technique.
No, absolutely. And I think, what will people think is that little voice in your head. It says it over and over again. What will people think? And you either push through that and think, okay, well, I'm going to put it out there because I feel that I've made a good job of it. And if people don't like it, that's fine. Or you worry so much about what people might think that you don't put it out there. And you never
Mm.
know, because until you get it out there, people might think it's wonderful and you might have been worrying about nothing. But unless you try, you never know.
Do you have any tips or suggestions for people that really want to try and do that, but are worried that they will get rejected? Is there a way that you found, because I think almost everyone, I'm sure everybody that has ever become anything within the art or the textile world has at some point had someone say, no, she say that's not for me, I don't think it would work for us, whatever.
Mhm.
And it is a hard thing to take, isn't it? It's a hard thing to take and come back from.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can be. And I think if you get that early on, it sort of can really knock your confidence. I mean, I think the advice that I would give to someone starting out is start slowly, recognize what you can do, not what you can't do. And before you put it out to the entire world, offer it around friends and family first and say, I've been making these. What do you think? If you saw that, would you buy it?
Mm.
And I think, hopefully friends and family will be kind and normally enthusiastic. But if they feel that it needs some improvement, hopefully they will then let you know that in a constructive and compassionate way, so that you're getting the constructive feedback, but you're not having to worry about people that may be a little bit harsh, because I think we've all come across people that can be a little bit harsh sometimes.
Yes, I think sometimes, unfortunately, there are people out there that almost take pleasure. They can sense that somebody is perhaps right at the beginning of their journey, and they almost take a little bit of pleasure in knocking them back, don't they? Which is sad.
Yeah, absolutely. And my philosophy is, when I'm out and about, if I'm at shows or wherever I am, if somebody is quite new to it, and you get talking to people and they say, well, I've just started out and this is my first or second show. And I try to encourage them. I try to sort of, if I can impart any little nuggets of wisdom, then, that's fine. And I think it's all about sharing what you learn along the way with others. It's not a competition.
Mm.
And I think if you can get out there and share some of your wisdom and help support other people, and maybe help, give them their confidence. Maybe they had a really bad day. And if you say something positive to them and you say, oh, I really like that. And have you thought about doing this? Or did you know you can do that? And I can send you some information. All that sort of thing really helps.
Yeah, absolutely. So, just sort of returning to your book, what is it about the sea that so inspired you that you decided that you would like to put a book together on it?
I think it's several things, really. I mean, living in Devon, and I was born in Devon, I've lived all my life here. I'm about half an hour from the coast. So we visit the coast regularly throughout the year. So, I see the coast on beautiful sunny days when the beach is full of people, but also in the midst of winter when it's, you know, blowing a gale and has a completely different atmosphere. And I think it's very captivating, the different moods of the sea, the colors, even with the sand. I think as a child, I've always, like so many children, loved to go along and sort of see what I could pick up, see what I could find. And it's always given me that sense of joy, I guess. You feel a sense of, or I feel a sense of freedom when I'm at the coast. It's a big expanse. The water goes for as far as you can possibly see, and I find it very relaxing there. And yeah, a big sort of sense of freedom, getting away from it all, getting away from the rat race. So I guess really for me, it's that essence I can then bring back to my work. A lot of the colours of the sea I particularly am drawn to. So when I'm creating work, although I create other works other than coastal work, I'm very drawn to coastal work. I love all the colours, the aquas, the teals, the blues, that sort of thing, really.
And as far as the book itself is concerned, could you perhaps just talk us through it a little bit? Because you'd give some areas where people can actually get inspiration, some suggestions for where they get it, but also some technique processes. If you could just chat us through what your sort of intention was. Were you aiming for somebody that was already sewing but would be able to take further their techniques and their design process, or someone just starting off?
I think I was aiming for both, really. I think the book is very geared to someone who is just starting off with free motion machine embroidery, and thinking about something, what else can I do apart from sort of very simple, straightforward designs that you see on all sorts of household things. So I think I was hoping to inspire people to think, okay, so let's start at the beginning. I go through things like how to set your sewing machine up, and getting inspiration from the coast, or if you're not close to the coast, where else you can get inspiration from magazines and things like that. I know that I work in quite a different way to quite a few other textile artists, so no two pieces of mine will ever be the same. And I think I wanted to explore that with people and just show how easy it is, in a way, to actually just create something very simple and then build on that as your skills develop over time.
When you say that you work in a different way, what is it that you mean? In what way are you different to other textile artists?
I don't tend to draw out any sort of plan before I start, which is quite unusual. I do take photographs when we go to the coast, but I know a lot of people will take a sketchbook. I've found that using the camera on my phone works better for me. So I don't draw out. In a way, even if I'm working from photographs, I would say I work loosely from photographs. So I might take elements out, add elements in to make a good composition. So I'm not actually sort of following something rigidly, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
So I don't draw out because my pieces evolve as I create them. So I can't tell you what it's going to look like when it's finished as I start, because I don't know.
I see. So, for just following on from that, do you ever work to commission?
Yes, I do. And I've done numerous commissions, and it's an interesting process trying to get into the mindset of somebody else. I mean, people will often send me photographs and they will say, well, I want something like that. And then sometimes I will possibly sketch a couple of things for them just to give them some idea of what is in my mind, but it's not really for my benefit as such, it's more for theirs. But I find most people will give me a free rein. They'll often send me some photographs and say, I want a piece based on this. And I normally say to them, it won't look exactly like that. And they're quite happy with that. And yeah, we just go for there. I get odd requests at times. And sometimes I have to be honest with people. Well, if I put that in, that's not really going to work. But generally speaking, I will work with people and I send them photographs during the process so that they can see how the image is building and how their piece is coming together.
Mm.
And I think that instills confidence then, and if they say, oh, what about this? Could I put this in, or could you put that in? And then, we can have a conversation about that. And I can either say, well, I'm not sure if that works, or, oh, that's a really good idea. And then when it comes to the end, they're happy with their piece.
So, if you had a choice, would you prefer to work to commission or prefer to work on a piece of your own devising?
Oh, difficult question. Um, I suppose most people would probably say to you, I like working on my own pieces because I have the freedom then to do exactly what I want. Having said that, it is a real honor and privilege to work on commissions for people. Sometimes those commissions are very personal and they have very personal emotive meanings for people. It might be that it's a special memory of a special place, or sometimes people will send me materials and they will say, I want a piece done and I want you to include these materials because these have special memories for me. So they might not want a piece that represents a place as such. They might even want something that is almost sort of slightly abstract, but they want me to include, you know, pieces of fabric that mean something to them. And, that's such a privilege to be trusted with doing something like that.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. So, just sort of moving on a little bit, could you tell us about your favourite techniques and the processes that you use in general to create your textile pieces?
Yeah, I mean, I guess really the favorite technique has to be free motion machine embroidery because that's ultimately how my pieces are held together. So without being able to do that, I wouldn't be creating. So, that was something that I picked up when I first started experimenting. And up until, like I say, when I first started experimenting with textile art, that wasn't something that I'd ever come across before. And it was a game changer. You could move the fabric in any way you wanted and you could draw with your sewing machine. And that was just something that I hadn't come across before. So I guess that's one of my favorite techniques. The interesting thing is that as my work has developed, I very rarely now use colored thread in my work. I gone very much more to letting the fabrics speak for themselves. So I actually use an invisible thread to create the majority of my work and just put colored stitch detail in when I feel it adds something to the composition. But
Mm.
having that freedom to be able to just stitch pieces and go around in circles and just do whatever I want to is just absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's my favorite technique, I guess. But I do enjoy other things like fabric manipulation as well, heat manipulation of fabrics. I do a little bit of painting onto fabrics, as in I've been experimenting recently with like a jelly pad printing onto fabric and things like that using acrylic paints. I'm constantly exploring new techniques. I think I've just got that sort of very inquiring mind. And
Yeah.
if it works on, say, paper or something like that, well, maybe it'll work on fabric. I'm going to see where I can go with it.
So do you use a particular background for you in order to stabilize everything? Because machine embroidery does tend to create wrinkles, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's very, very susceptible to that. I've actually managed to source a fabric that won't do that, but is still fine enough that you can easily get it underneath the sewing machine. It's not too thick, but it means that you don't have to use an embroidery hoop or you don't have to put any stabilizer on the back before you start. Using an embroidery hoop for me was something that I recognized very early on was not going to work. It you just got to move it so much, and some of my work is quite large, or I might be doing long stems on flowers or something like that, and you would have to keep, even with a big ring, I would have to keep moving it, and every time you stop it interrupts your flow and your creative flow, and you tend to not get such smooth lines. um yeah, it's called fine stiff tarlatan scrim that I actually use, which is something that's used in the printing industry. But it's a sort of dense weave sort of scrim, but it's sized with starch, so it is firm, and it's the best thing that I've ever found for working.
Yes, because moving the hoop each time is very disruptive, isn't it? And
It
also
is.
the hoop tends to mark the fabric. It becomes very difficult to get those round shapes out,
Yeah,
even with
absolutely.
ironing.
Absolutely. It's okay if you're doing something quite small and you can do the whole of the working within the hoop. I can understand how that would work for people. But yeah, for me, I think it just, yeah, no, it was quite obvious early on. And it took me a long time to find a material that I was happy with, that I felt worked for me and did what I wanted it to do. It's not always easy to find these things.
No, and I was really interested to hear that you use an invisible thread, because that's actually something that a lot of people say, oh, that is so difficult to use in the machine because it breaks a lot. And,
Yeah.
I don't know how you find working with it all the time.
I don't have any problems at all with it. I think there's a couple of things. I think some machines just don't like it. But one of the main things that I find when I get people coming to workshops and they say, "Oh, you said to bring this invisible thread, so I have, but I've tried it loads of times and I don't get on with it." There's a couple of things really. Are they using an invisible thread that is designed for a sewing machine? Or have they bought a slightly thicker one because it's easier to thread the needle, but is actually designed for hand beading and hand stitching? The thicker one won't go through the sewing machine quite so easily. So it needs to be really fine, almost to the point where you can't see it. And the other thing that I do is I never put invisible thread in the bobbin. I only put it on the top. If you try and put it in the bobbin as well as on the top, then that does tend to be a recipe for disaster.
All right. And that's really interesting, actually, because I imagine most people would put it in the top and bottom. What is it that you put in the bottom instead that works well with it?
So in the bottom, I use something called bobbin fill, which is sometimes known as bottom line. It's a fine polyester thread. So it's a strong thread, so it's not going to break easily, but it's fine enough that you get less show through. As long as you get your settings right on your machine, you will get less show through with the stitching. So what I tend to do is I will use a white bobbin thread if I'm using invisible thread on the top or if I'm using any pale colors. And then I've got a black bobbin thread, bobbin fill, that I will use if I'm using dark colors, say to stitch dark stems or dark detail on tree trunks or something like that. And I find that that works really well.
I know sometimes you can set the machine, can't you, in such a way that the stitching, if anything pulls through from the bottom, you can adjust the tension so that hopefully it will stay there rather than
Yes.
pull through to the top.
Yes. Yeah, you can. And I cover this in the book and it's what I get asked a lot when I'm running workshops is what is the setting that I need so that my bobbin thread won't show through? And the honest answer is it varies so much from one machine to another that it's just trial and error. So what I get people to do is we have a little bit of a practice run to the side before we start off, and we just have a fiddle with the setting. Generally speaking, it needs to be the top tension setting needs to be slightly lower than it would be for normal stitching, but how much lower, like I say, varies from one machine to another. So therefore, I get people to sort of drop it a bit, see what it's like, and then fiddle around until they've got it exactly as they want it. And then I get them to take a photograph of that setting on their phones so that they can remember what that setting is. I only use my machine for textile art, but most other people will be using it to maybe do home furnishings or make clothes, all sorts of things. So they'll be moving the settings around. So it's a good tip. Take a photograph, have it on your phone, and then you know exactly what setting you need to go back to.
It is a good tip. I I would imagine as well that each time you change fabrics, what fabric you've actually got on your ground is going to make a difference to that tension setting as well.
Yes, it can do. Yeah, this is why I always say to people, test it on the fabric that you're going to use. So I get people to test it on the piece of tarlatan scrim that I've supplied them for their backing. Because if you just tested it on, say, a piece of cotton or linen, it wouldn't be the same.
Yeah, no, I could well imagine. Do you have a particular make of machine you use or a particular model?
I've always used Genome, and quite a straightforward basic model, really. I find that the more basic the machine, the easier it is to adapt for free motion. There's a couple of things that I feel help. Yeah, top loaders tend to be better. I don't really know why, but for some reason they just seem to not throw up so many problems when you're trying to do free motion, or certainly that's my experience. That's not to say that you can't do free motion on front loading machines, because you can, but sometimes it can be a bit more tricky to get things set up.
Mm.
And I find a basic machine actually works a lot better than a really complicated high-end computerized machine, because with a basic machine, you actually have more freedom to alter things yourself. Often with highly computerized machines, it's either that button or that button. And if you want something that's in between, then you can't really achieve that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would completely agree with you there. I do like machines that leave the choice of the needle up or down to the operator. That I think that's quite useful,
Yes, it
particularly
is.
when you're doing machine embroidery, because you do normally want to probably have the needle up, don't you, so that you can move from place to place.
Yes, absolutely. The only time really I leave the needle in if I stop is if I'm part way through something, and I might, if it's a really large piece, I might have to turn the fabric round to be able to see where I'm going to do the second half of something. So then I will leave the needle in to make sure that I start off in the same place. But apart from that, having the needle up so that you can then freely move things, jump across, do a bit of stitching somewhere else is really useful.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. So I know that you have taken part in Sky Arts Landscape Artist of the Year. It was in Series
Yes,
9. Can you tell us something about the experience, how you found it? Because that must have been really fascinating.
it was. It was an amazing experience. And I absolutely loved it. And going back to what we said earlier, that is something that I would never ever have done as my younger self. So I saw an invitation come out online for people to apply, and I thought, oh, why not? But filled out the application, sent it off, and then promptly forgot about it, because I didn't think for 1 minute that I would get any further. But I thought, well, nothing ventured, nothing gained. And then I had a phone call a few months later saying, oh, we'd like to offer you a place.
Oh,
And
wow.
I was actually setting up at a show, and I nearly sort of fell off my perch. So that was amazing. You don't get a choice as to where you go. They said, we'd like to offer you a place and we'd like you to come to join us for filming of this heat. So I'm based in Devon, and the heat that they offered me was in Aberdeenshire in Scotland. So they couldn't have sent me much further.
They couldn't, could
Um,
they?
but I certainly, having been offered a place, I wasn't going to say no. So I actually went to Dunarta Castle in Aberdeenshire, which for those people who don't know, it's like a slight outcrop of rock, just off of the coastal edge, and it's got the castle on the top. It's a castle ruin. It's got quite a checkered history. It's where they stored the Scottish crown jewels during various wars with England, and all sorts of things like that have gone on. You would never think so to be there now. It is the most stunningly beautiful, peaceful place.
Mm.
You just cannot imagine the horrors that went on there, previously, centuries ago. So it was quite an experience. I've never ever sewn outside before. And I think a lot of stitchers will probably tell you the same.
Yeah.
Hand stitching, yes. Sewing machine, no, definitely not. So I was the only textile artist there for my heat. So everybody else turned up with a couple of canvases under one arm and a bag with a load of paints in the other hand. And I turned up with two sewing machines because I was absolutely terrified in case I took one and it broke down.
Oh, I can
Um,
imagine, yes.
and about four boxes of fabrics and thread and embellishments and everything else that I thought I might need. Because obviously, if you're painting, you can mix the colours of paints once you're there. But I needed to take everything that I thought I might need. So that was quite a challenge. They ran an electricity cable all the way across the field for me and plugged me in. And we started, and it was like, oh yeah,
Mm.
it's amazing. I mean, what you see when you watch the program is a very small snippet of the actual day. We had to be on site for 7 a.m. and we didn't leave till 7 p.m. So it was a 12-hour day,
Wow,
but you
that's
only get four
punishing.
hours to make your piece. Yeah,
Mm.
absolutely.
Mm.
You get 4 hours to make your piece, you get 2 hours, then a lunch break, and then another 2 hours. But it's all the other things they do in between, filming you arriving and filming you asking questions and all that sort of thing, and then getting your input. So it's quite full on. And even when you're working, they come up with cameras from behind and to the sides, and they'll stop you and they'll ask you questions as you're going along. But yeah, I mean, so glad I did it. So glad
Yeah.
I did it.
It's got to be a huge challenge to do anything stitched in 4 hours.
It was a huge challenge to do it in 4 hours. And the extra challenge that I had was it was a beautiful sunny day, but you're on the edge of a cliff looking out over the North Sea, and it was quite breezy. So I would cut bits of fabric and put them down, having offered them up and decided, right, that's what I want, but this bit needs to go on first. And then I'd turn around and I'd think, oh, it's not there anymore.
Oh, gone
And
over
it
the
had
edge of
blown
the cliff.
away. Yeah, gone over the cliff. There's bits of my fabric floating around in the North Sea.
Oh, no. Oh, dear.
So yeah, so from that sort of perspective, it was slightly more of a challenge for me maybe than some of the painters. But yeah, I mean, so glad I did it.
I think it's brilliant because it really because it's such a mainstream program, people will be watching that won't have had really any exposure to textiles, and I think it's great that now they will have had after watching you, you know.
Absolutely.
Mm,
Yeah, I think that's really important. I've had lots of people message me and spoken to me, when I've been out and about this summer and said, "Oh, I saw you on the program," and "Oh, I didn't know that this sort of thing was possible." And I
mm,
think for me as well, I think I sort of probably felt that I wouldn't get any further than the first heat because people using alternative mediums don't seem to tend to get any further, but I wanted to sort of fly the flag for textile art because it has been sort of slightly looked down on in the past, or it's not proper art, this sort
mm.
of thing. It's more of a craft. And I wanted to be able to sort of do my bit to say, look, it is, and this is what you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. I it always annoys me actually to hear sort of people say that sort of thing, because in actual fact, I think it's this is just my personal opinion, but I think that it's easier to draw or paint something, a lot easier, than it is to have to design it. So you still have to go through the draw and paint stage very often, to sort of get
Mm,
an idea of what you're doing. And then you have to make the decision about how you translate that design into fabric and thread, because there's obviously lots of different techniques and alternatives. I mean, that process that you go through, I think, is much more complicated,
mm.
and more skilled actually. than just straightforwardly sitting down and painting something. I don't know if you'd agree, but I agree. It does annoy me to hear it looked down upon.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I feel quite strongly that textile art should be recognized as an art form equal to painting in watercolor or oils or any other form of art, that there is. And it's very interesting. I apply to quite a lot of artists' open calls, and it's interesting that gradually every year there seems to be more people that are saying that they will accept textiles, which is a good thing. It means that things are moving on. It's still got a way to go. There are still people who go, "Oh no, we don't take textiles. That's not proper art." But it is getting better, and I've had my work selected for exhibition in some high end London exhibitions, and that I would have never thought that I would have got my work in there because it was textile art, but I sort of gave it a go, and they said, "Oh well, we'll consider textile art," and it's been accepted, so it is getting better.
I think it's trailblazers like yourself that do apply to galleries that you perhaps know don't have a history of taking textiles, that really have been instrumental in bringing that change about. Because until galleries are pushed or they are presented with somebody that they can see clearly has talent in a particular field, perhaps it's just not something they even consider.
No, I think you're right. I think you're right. And I think there are still going to be gallery owners who maybe haven't even heard of it, possibly. If they're focused on a particular medium, then, they might not have even, like you say, considered it.
Yeah.
And it's just so important to just keep pushing away gently and just sort of, yeah, I get rejections, I get rejections all the time. But then if you ask any other artist, they'll say they get rejections too. And that's just part of being an artist. And it doesn't matter what medium you use. But I'm getting a lot more yeses now than I have been. I've just recently had a piece, textile art abstract piece on show at the Mile Galleries in London for the Royal Society of Marine Artists Open Exhibition. And when I applied, I thought, I think I might be being a bit ambitious here, but I'm going to apply. And they said yes. So it's always worth trying.
Well, that's brilliant. That's great to hear. So, how can you tell us a little bit about how your new book came about, Textile Seascapes? Obviously, I know that it's published by Crowwood, but did they approach you? Did you approach them? How did that happen?
So basically, they approached me. It's something that a lot of my ladies that come on to workshops or people that have followed my little 10-minute Instagram videos during lockdown have been asking me about for several years. When are you going to write a book? When are you going to write a book? And I think, like anybody else, it was a push outside my comfort zone. So therefore, when people said, "Oh, when are you going to write a book?" I was like, "Oh, well, maybe one day." And then it sort of went off my radar because obviously, what I enjoy doing is actually making and stitching the textiles and making the textile art. So when Crowwood approached me, I thought, right, okay, so now somebody has actually, a publisher has actually come to me and said, "We think that we'd like to publish a book. We think that you could write a book that would be of interest to our readers." It made me stop and think, well, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it now. And I think it just gave me that push that I needed.
And what was the process about for writing the book? I mean, did they tell you what they wanted to see? Did they leave a lot to you? I just wondered how the whole thing sort of became assembled. Because there's so many processes, isn't there?
An awful lot more to it than you realize. So basically, once I'd agreed to do it, they wanted a general outline from me of what it was going to be about. And like I say, I chose seascapes because of the fact that I live close to the sea. It's somewhere I love. I create a lot of seascapes. I sell more coastal art than anything else. So it was a natural choice. And then they wanted me to just put together how I was going to sort of compose the book. So they wanted ideas about chapters really and what I was going to cover. And once we'd agreed on that, and we'd agreed that that was, a good all round, gave something for everybody, then pretty much I was left to my own devices to get on and then write it. After I'd written the first chapter, they wanted to see that just to make sure that they were happy with the way that I was writing and how things were coming across. And then I was very much sort of left to get on with it. They were always there if I needed help and support. And I knew that, I had a contact that I could go to if I was saying, well, I'm doing this chapter and I'm not sure about this or that or whatever. So they were always there and there was always support, but they were quite happy to sort of check in every so often and sort of say, how's it going? How far have you got? And obviously, I had a deadline. And I actually met the deadline, which I was really
Oh,
surprised.
well done.
And then they said to me, oh, hardly anybody meets the deadline after I'd been working my socks off for the last couple of weeks trying to get it all finished.
Hmm. So how long did it take?
It took a year.
Gosh, that's quite an undertaking, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, obviously, during that year, I had other commitments as well. So I'd already had workshops booked in, I already had shows booked in. And then a few months after agreeing to do the book and making a start, Sky Arts came and approached me and said, we'd like to offer you a place. So then I
Oh.
had that to do as well. So you know what they say, nothing comes for ages and then it all comes at once.
Yeah, it's like
So it was a
buses,
bit
isn't
like that.
it? But as far as the actual photography and in the book, do you do it yourself, or is that something that you're able to contract out to someone else? Or
It's a combination, really. I'm very lucky because my husband really enjoys photography. He's not a professional photographer, but he enjoys it as a hobby. So he's got all the gear.
Mm.
And I also work with a professional photographer and framer to photograph and frame my work so that I can get giclée prints done and greeting cards and things like that done of my pieces as well. So some of the pieces in the book, some of the photographs in the book are from my photographer, and some of them are from my husband.
Right, right. So that's great, isn't it? If you've got somebody that's sort of in-house, so to speak.
It does help because I kept thinking, how does anybody do this if they keep having to say to a professional photographer, okay, so can you come over just for a couple of hours now and a couple of hours here? Because, when you're doing the process ones, you're doing a little bit and then a little bit another time and then a little bit another time and fitting it in around other things. So,
Mm.
in a way that really helped.
I suppose that in a way it must be a little bit like, or I imagine it must be a little bit like taking classes, because often you have to do several samples, don't you, at different stages, so that
Yeah,
you can stop and show people what it looks like at this stage or at that stage. I imagine it's a
yeah.
little bit like that.
Yes, it is. I'd say it's more difficult than that. When I run workshops, I always make a piece alongside the ladies that are attending the workshop, because that way I can sort of show them each step of the process. But sometimes when I was sort of trying to get my husband to photograph it as I was going through, you can't actually photograph every single thing you do because you'd have a book just full of one project and nothing else. So I was trying to sort of streamline, and sometimes it's much harder to create a photograph that shows what you're trying to do compared to just saying, well, this is what I do, and they're there, or you've got a video and they can just actually see a process of, even if the process is sort of 30 seconds long, trying to explain it in words and showing it in a photograph that is effectively a still, I found quite tricky.
I can imagine. Who does the layout on the book? Do you work to a sort of a master page plan, or is that something that goes back to Crowwood to do?
Yeah, that's their department completely. I just sent it all off, words and photographs separately, but all cross-referenced so that they knew what needed to go where. And then I just left them to that, and then they came back to me with a proof once they'd sort of compiled it all. And then there was a bit of to-ing and fro-ing about, oh well, there's a couple of things there we just need to change, or but yeah,
Mhm.
they do that. That's way beyond my capability.
I just imagine that it would be, I presume obviously you get a copy back or a proof back, and you can look through it, because for anybody that doesn't understand the processes that would go into a piece of textile art, it must be quite hard to put the instructions together.
Yeah, it is very difficult. And it's interesting because the one thing they said to me is, for captions for underneath the photos, try and make them all about the same length, as in word count. And I thought, well, that's all very well, but sometimes it doesn't. I've tried to, but it doesn't always work like that. Sometimes I felt like I needed two
Mm.
sentences under one photograph, but maybe only a very short sentence over another because it was more self-explanatory. So, yeah, it is quite tricky.
Yes, I could imagine it is. So, what's next, Alison? What is it that is coming up in the near future for you? Do you have plans for any more books? Have you got exhibitions on the way?
So basically, no plans for any more books at the moment, but then obviously this one has just been published. So, who knows what the future might bring. But at the moment, I think I need a rest from writing a book because it does take a lot out of you.
Mm, yes.
And I also want to concentrate on creating some new bodies of work, because that was the one thing that did have to give to be able to find the time to do it. So I want to be able to concentrate on creating some new bodies of work going forward. I'm experimenting more with incorporating various forms of mixed media in with my textiles now, so I want to develop that further. And I'm about to bring out my workshop program for 2025, and I will be adding some more new workshops and to that. I've got a workshop portfolio at the moment of about, I think, 6 or 8 different workshops, but I'm currently just putting the finishing touches to a few more workshops that will be coming out the beginning of November. So I haven't got long now.
No, it's
Um,
very close on that, isn't it?
Yes, all of a sudden the time just runs away with you.
Mm.
So next year I'm doing a few art shows, and I also exhibit at Craft in Focus, which is based up around the home county. So I'm going back there next year as well to do a few shows with them. I've done some this year. And I'm moving a little bit more towards doing some art fairs as well, which will be an interesting development. Haven't really done much of that before. So I've always done the mixed discipline where there's art and sort of high end craft as well, sort of ceramics and jewelry and wood turning and that sort of thing. So I'm doing a few art shows again in the home counties. And I'm currently applying for various shows. This is the time of year when you apply to a lot of the shows, and then sort of January time is when you find out whether you've got a place or not. So I'm busy doing that at the moment. So I'm hoping that I will get out and about a bit more and get to a wider audience next year. I'm certainly
Mm.
applying for different shows and things. So yeah, watch this space.
So, when you go to the shows, are you taking original work, or are you taking prints, or?
Yeah, well, both really. I tend to take original work prints, sometimes greeting cards, but not always. It depends on the show and what they actually tell you can bring. And there are shows I because it's close to me, I do Craft for Crafters at West Point in Exeter, which is it's a bit like the knitting and stitching show, but down here basically. So
Yeah.
it's a smaller version of that sort of thing. So it's very much for people that are stitchers and creators. And I've had a stand there for about the last 5 or 6 years, and I will be going there, which is in the end of March next year. And I will be doing what I normally do there that I don't do at other shows, and I demonstrate. So I sit there for the 3 days and I do lots of demonstrating, showing the techniques, showing how you put compositions together. People can drop by, have a look, go off, have a coffee, come back, have a look, see how it's getting on. They can ask me questions about what I'm doing. So I'm really looking forward to being back there in March next year. And of course, I will have copies of my book there as well for people to buy.
Yes, of course. I'm sure that you must be so proud of it. I mean, it looks lovely. Just
Still
looking
can't
at
believe I've done it, to be honest.
it. No, you must be absolutely delighted, I'm sure. Thank you so much for joining me today, Alison. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you. And just tell us again the name of the book so that if the listeners want to go out and buy it, they can do.
So the book is called Textile Seascapes. It's published by Crowwood Press, and it's available through all good bookshops and on Amazon, both as a paperback copy and as a Kindle.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's been absolutely fascinating hearing more about you and your work. I do appreciate you joining me.
You're very welcome, Gail. It's been a pleasure.